Welcome back, everyone. I'm Chris, and welcome to Dark Horror Diaries. Forget ghosts. Tonight, we focus on real horror, the quiet human evil right outside your bedroom window. Our theme? The terror of being alone at night and the sinister presence next door. We have 3 stories coming up that are guaranteed to make you question every quiet moment you spend by yourself. Turn up the volume, turn down the lights, and prepare to feel exposed.
It was May 22nd. School had just gotten out for the year. I was 14 at the time. I still remember this like it was yesterday. We lived in a modified trailer house, but a nice one. We made renovations so there were more rooms, and added on a deck and a garage. It was raining that day, and I had just stepped off the bus to my house when I knew something was off. Our car was in the driveway, and my parents were both supposed to be at work. Definitely not at home. My mom was a nurse and worked at a hospital about a half an hour away, and my dad was a construction worker. They both worked 7-5 shifts almost every weekday and usually didn't get home until around 5:30 or 6. My little brother, 9 at the time, got off the bus just before me and ran to the front door. "Mom's home!" he called, holding the door open to the entryway for me. "Thanks, I know," I said glumly. I liked when my parents weren't home after school, just so I could get some alone time. The door was unlocked, and we both stepped inside. "Hey guys," Mom said, a little too cheerily. "It's Grandma's birthday today, so we're going over to celebrate. Everyone's there already, so Dad and I got off work early." I remember nodding my head and walking to my room. "Oh, you don't have to go if you don't want to. I don't want you to get the other kids sick," Mom called after me. I was sick with a cold, just because the summer months in our state aren't very warm. I thought about it, and yeah, it would be nice to stay home. My grandparents lived in the country, on a farm about an hour away. The cell phone service out there was never really good, and I never understood how they lived out there without complaints. "Sure," I told her, "I have some things to do anyway." About 15 minutes passed as my brother got ready to go. They dressed up pretty nicely, as it was just a normal birthday party. "See you later," my brother said as I heard the front door close. "Finally," I said, mumbling. It was only 4 o'clock at the time, and so, as a normal teenager would, I sat on the couch for a good 3 hours and watched TV. I played a new game I downloaded on my phone for another hour after. I remember it being 8 o'clock when I remembered I was told to wash the dishes before my parents got home, and if I didn't, my phone would be taken away. Oops! I got up from the couch and stretched. Also, I had a cat at the time, a black one. Her name was Ruby, and she was about 3 years old. There was a large glass window in front of our sink in the kitchen, and the one thing I didn't like about it was that there were no blinds. It was dark out, and if I washed the dishes with the lights on, someone would easily be able to see me from the street. I wasn't scared of being home alone at night, just a little uneasy. And the reason I was uneasy was because one of my favorite YouTubers, Loey Lane, tells ghost stories on her channel, and guess who was watching them for 3 hours? Me. Yeah, not a good idea. I didn't believe in the paranormal or monsters, of course, but I was obviously scared of them. I just found the stories entertaining, but always regretted it because they would keep me up at night. So, reluctantly, I did the dishes. I put Spotify on the TV, just so it wouldn't be so quiet. After I finished, I decided to treat myself to a hot bath. It was still scary to be so vulnerable by myself. I don't know what I was so scared of. Someone breaking into the house? I turned the TV on in the living room, just so it wasn't eerily quiet. The bathroom was right beside the living room, so I could hear the sound through the wall. I locked the bathroom door, just to be safe. Again, I was young and scared. I turned on the water and sat on the toilet until it was finished. I left the living room and kitchen lights on. They were connected with no wall, and the TV on. Our house was long, like I said, a trailer home. So my room was on one end with another bathroom, but this bathroom only had a shower, not a bathtub, then the kitchen and the living room in the middle, then the bathroom and my parents' room on the other side from my room. So, to get back to my room from the bathroom I was in, I had to walk all the way through the house. My brother's room and a few other rooms in the house, an office, a wood stove, relaxing room and such, were built on, so it was just a straight line from my room to the bathroom. I made sure to shut all the windows and their blinds. Keep in mind, there was a huge window in the living room above the couch, and I shut those too. I also brought my cat into the bathroom with me, just because I didn't want her to be alone out there, so she just laid on the rug. I got into the bath and played some music on my phone just so it wasn't quiet. As you can tell, I was very paranoid of any unknown noises, so I put on other noises. Nearing the end of my bath, I remember the conditioner in my hair, and I dunked my head in the water to wash it out. My ears and eyes were submerged under too, and right then I could swear I heard the door open and close to the bathroom. Of course, the sound was muffled, and I locked the door, so that couldn't have happened. I quickly sat up and rubbed my eyes dry. The door was of course shut, but it took me a while to notice that it was no longer locked. The little knob thingy on the doorknob was turned sideways, so it was indeed unlocked, not how I left it. I noticed that after my bath. I was drying off and put on my robe, and I looked at my cat. She was sitting on the toilet seat staring at the door, not at me. "Ruby," I said, but she still stared at the door. I looked at the lock and gasped. I shook it off because maybe I imagined locking it. I shut off my loud music and was about to open the bathroom door when I noticed that there was no more sound coming from the TV. I shook my head and opened the door. It was pitch black. All the lights were off. The TV was too. The only light came from the little clock on the stove and the microwave. And then I heard it, stomping cane from the other bathroom and my bedroom. I slammed the bathroom door shut and locked it again. My hands flew over my mouth and I sat on the bathroom floor. I had no idea when my parents would get home, but I hoped it would be soon. I picked out my phone to call my mom. Dead battery. I was just playing music on it, but I was too scared to speak. I can still hear that stomping echoing in my brain, then and now, so violent and heavy. It shook me. I sat on the other side of the bathroom away from the door with my cat in my lap. And again, I heard it. You may believe this isn't real or I'm lying, but I promise you, deep down in my heart, I know what a hard. Two little knocks came from the other side of the bathroom door. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I buried my face in my robe. My cat scurried over to the door and sat there, hissing at it. All I remember is sitting there for hours with the lights on, too scared to go use the home phone or grab a charger for my phone. And there was no way in hell I was sleeping or even going in my room. The rain outside poured on the roof, drowning out the thoughts of all the noises I was hearing. I could swear doors were closing and opening out there. I remember falling asleep at about 4 a.m. because I glanced up at the clock on the wall. I had sleep paralysis that night. I had only heard about people having it, and this was the first time I had ever had it, and the only time. I remember I could only move my fingers, but I couldn't see anything. My mom found me in the bathroom the next morning. They stayed at my grandparents' house overnight because the weather was so bad. I told her what had happened. She said she believed me, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't. I didn't sleep in my bedroom for a month afterwards. True story. This happened while I was visiting Japan last summer. I was traveling solo at the time. I'd gone through most of Asia, visiting cities like Shanghai, Bangkok, Hanoi, Seoul, etc. The last place on my list was Tokyo. I spent the days sightseeing, eating as much sushi as I could handle, and spent the nights wandering the streets, drinking with locals, and hitting any club that looked interesting. I was having the time of my life. I found myself in a more out-of-the-way club on my second to last night there. It wasn't some extremely obscure place or anything, just less tourist-heavy than the others. More populated with locals, I suppose. It was an interesting place. It gave off a grimmier vibe, with its harsh lighting and aggressive techno music. It was my kind of venue for sure. At some point, I found myself sitting with a couple of locals, Teiji and Shin. Their English was pretty solid, so talking to them was easy enough. "Can't believe I'm headed back soon," I said, downing another Asahi. "Back to boring old America." Teiji laughed. "Stay anywhere long enough and it becomes boring. Japan is no different." I suppose I agreed. Perhaps I just didn't want to go back to my ordinary life. I turned in my seat and scanned the club, eventually spotting a woman dancing by herself near a corner. She was beautiful. Her dark shoulder-length hair flowed seamlessly with her movements, and her facial features looked like they were carved out of stone. She was also wearing a tight purple dress that just about revealed every aspect of her voluptuous physique. I couldn't believe that every guy in the club wasn't all over her. Hey, I looked back at Teiji and Shin. What's a good Japanese pickup line? Not too complicated, though. Shin grinned. Ah, good-looking guy like you doesn't even need it. Just dance your way in. Where's the lucky lady? I gestured over my shoulder with my beer towards the woman in the corner. Shin's face dropped upon seeing her. He pointed at her before whispering something to Teiji. His face dropped as well. Shin looked back at me. Hey, I know this great place about 1 kilometer away. You want to head there? I furrowed my eyebrows and laughed. Oh, come on. I looked back at the woman, still dancing, still as beautiful as ever. You don't want me hitting on her? You're planning on taking her for yourself, huh? You guys are slick. I'll give you that. Teiji shook his head. No, man. Are you not wondering why nobody's talking to her? Why she's dancing alone? I don't know, I said, shrugging. Is her boyfriend Yakuza or something? Shin sighed. I'm sorry, maybe that was insensitive. No, Shin replied. You'd be safer if she was dating a Yakuza. That certainly got me confused. I don't... What do you mean? Shin looked down. I don't know how to explain it to you. She doesn't appear often, but her being here really makes me want to leave. Will you come with us? They seemed pretty serious about it, so I relented. We left and spent the next few hours getting completely plastered. We said our goodbyes sometime around 3 a.m., and I started making my way back to the hotel. On the way, I passed the same club where I'd met them, the club with the dancing woman. It still seemed to be open, so I walked back in, more curious than anything. The place had cleared out a bit, but wasn't empty by any means. I scanned the dance floor once again. She was still there, still in the same corner, still dancing, still alone. What would you do in this situation? In my drunken state, I began convincing myself that Teiji and Shin were just messing with me, that I couldn't pass up an opportunity to talk to a woman as beautiful as her. I didn't stop to ask myself why she was still dancing in the same corner of the same club nearly 3 hours later. I walked onto the floor and began bopping my head to the techno. I was no dancer by professional standards, but pretty solid by drunk club standards. I noticed that was I getting weird stares as I made my way over to her. I think I even saw some guy starting to walk towards me, only to be pulled back by his girl. Looking back, all the red flags were there, but at the moment, I couldn't care less. I got within a few feet of her before trying my atrocious Japanese on her. Hey, I said, you sure like this place, huh? She looked up at me and smiled. She was even more stunning up close, a little too stunning in retrospect, as if she were computer-generated or something. Yeah, now that I really think about it, she hardly looked real at all. She didn't really say anything, just gestured over for me to dance with her, which I obliged. It went pretty normal at first. I was kinda nervous, so I wasn't sure if I should grab her waist or not. Soon enough, she made that decision for me. She grabbed my wrists and wrapped them around her hips. I remember her grip being tight, nearly uncomfortably so. However, my mind was so clouded with the prospect that I might actually get to sleep with her that I just let it happen. Her face began getting close to mine. My heart started beating hard as I matched her movements, leaning in myself. Soon enough, we were making out. My heart started beating even faster as ecstasy coursed through my system, but that feeling wouldn't last so long. I started tasting blood as her tongue swirled around in my mouth. A lot of it. I pulled back and stared in horror as red dripped down her lips. She gave me a ghastly grin before leaning in again. I tried stepping even further back, but her iron grip didn't let up. In fact, her fingers began digging into my flesh. The taste of metal inundating my senses was disgusting. I spat blood onto the dance floor before seeing something wriggling within it. I nearly puked. The woman forced me back towards her and looked me dead in the eyes. They'd become a deep, swirling black, as if I were staring into some obscure abyss. At that point, I did the only thing I could think of. Using all of my strength, I bashed my head into hers 3 times consecutively. It hurt like hell for me, but she barely flinched. Nevertheless, it still caused her to loosen her grip. I fell backwards, reeling from the pain. Nobody else in the club seemed to notice, though, or they were just pretending not to. I could see their expressions illuminated faintly by the grimy lights. They were moving their bodies as if nothing had happened, but their faces were telling a different story. They all looked horrified. I looked back at the woman. She was still standing in her corner, glaring at me with an expression saturated with pure malice. And then she grinned. a wide, bloody grin. I wiped the residual blood from my mouth, bolted up, and ran the hell out of the club. I spent my last day in Tokyo locked up in my room. I tried convincing myself that what happened wasn't real, that I'd been drugged or something. Yet the wounds on my wrists and the cuts on my tongue and insides of my cheek pretty much confirmed it was real. At the very least, something had happened. Now, I don't know if I'm going crazy or what, but I swear I've seen glimpses of her since. Sometimes it'll be a familiar purple dress sticking out in the crowd. Other times, I think I'll see somebody dancing alone in a corner for a split second before disappearing. It's not only in clubs, though. It's everywhere I go. I could hear shuffling in my basement last night. Sometimes I'll cough up blood, only to see something squirming in the sink. I really hope I'm just going crazy. I inspect what most people are trained not to see. Hairline fractures in sidewalks, unstable retaining walls, temporary steel plates slapped over holes that swallow attention as easily as they swallow sound. The city pays me to predict failure before it happens, to look at concrete and dirt and say, this will collapse, this will give way, this will kill someone if we let it wait too long. By day, I wear a reflective vest and carry a tablet full of maps. By night, I run, because if I stop moving for too long, the past catches up in pieces, sharp as broken glass. On the night it began, I left a work site 10 minutes late, earbuds dead, battery at 6%, and my legs already itching for pavement. I ran the moment I threw my bag into the back seat, cutting through streets still warm from the day, moving on instinct and habit, because routine is the only promise I trust. My route never changes. 6.4 miles, measured and remeasured in my head like a prayer. Out through the warehouse district, across Falcon Bridge, along the canal path, then back through the narrow residential blocks that smell like laundry soap and cut grass even after midnight. The first mile is always a lie told by adrenaline. Everything feels light. The second mile is work. By the third, my mind empties and the noise that usually lives there quiets to a dull hum. That is why I run so late. Fewer cars, no barking dogs, no casual questions. I had just crossed under the bridge span when I noticed the sound of footfalls that were not mine, not the uneven slap of someone struggling to keep pace, not the soft skitter of someone about to fall behind. These were steady, deliberate, timed between my own steps as if we were parts in the same machine. I told myself it was nothing because the brain always reaches for the easiest story first. Another runner, a cyclist coasting with one foot on the pavement, a trick of acoustics under concrete and steel. I glanced into the canal where black water moved like folded cloth and forced my gaze forward again. The path curved and the light poles stuttered in predictable intervals. My shadow moved long and thin beside me, and another shadow followed it, taller, narrower, close enough that I could see the stretch of it, but not the source. I sped up without breaking stride. The shadow sped up too. I slowed just enough to test it. The space between us did not change. I felt irritation before fear, the way you do when someone stands too close in line and pretends not to notice. At the 4th mile marker, I stopped dead, lungs burning, my shoes scraped grit and a scatter of leaves. I turned fast, ready with a sharp word I had learned from working around crews who respected volume and certainty. The path was empty from bridge to bend. Light pooled on bare concrete. The only movement was my own chest rising too hard and too fast. I stood there long enough for the night to settle back into itself, for the water to whisper against the canal wall again. Then I laughed once out loud because the alternative was to catalog everything that had not made sense, and I was not ready for that. When I started running again, I told myself I had imagined the timing, that bodies were good at manufacturing patterns where none existed. The next morning at the field office, I told my supervisor about a hairline crack I had logged on Harbor Avenue and about the lighting outage near the West Spur. I did not tell him about shadows. Rob was new to the job and still believed reports were neutral things. Over burned coffee and paper cups, my coworker Jenna leaned against the counter and flicked through messages on her phone. She had the kind of brightness that made others trust her without proof. "You look wrecked," she said without looking up. I shrugged. "Ran too late," I said. "Again," she replied, amused instead of concerned. "One of these nights, you are going to scare yourself half to death." I almost told her how close that had felt to a prediction. Night came as it always does, slow and then all at once. I argued with myself for 10 minutes before lacing my shoes, bargaining in small, dishonest ways. 1 mile only, slow pace. I would turn back if anything felt off. The warehouse windows were blind squares this time, most tenants gone for the evening, alarms ticking quietly behind metal doors. I ran past the same rusted ladder, leaning against a loading dock, and the same toppled cone beside a storm drain. At the mouth of the bridge, the footfalls began again. I did not stop this time. I lengthened my stride, then pushed harder, lungs tight with effort. The distance between us stayed identical. No matter how fast I drove my body forward, that invisible presence matched me with infuriating precision. I told myself if someone meant me harm, they would close the gap. The fact that they did not should have been comforting. It was not. By the time I reached the canal path, my thoughts were no longer in order. Images arrived without context. The tablet I carried at work slipping from my hands, fresh concrete collapsing in on itself. A figure stepping from light into dark. I cut my run short and veered into the residential blocks a half-mile early, darting down a side street that was not part of the plan. I waited for the pattern to break. It did not. Footfalls followed the turn with the same infuriating restraint. I reached an intersection where a single porch light glowed like a signal and spun around. This time I saw him, tall, taller than any man I worked with, narrow shoulders under dark clothing that did not reflect light. No phone glow, no labored breath. He stood at the far end of the block, just inside the veil of shadow, and did nothing at all. I opened my mouth to speak and found I had no question that made sense. After a long moment, he stepped back once and vanished behind the corner, as if folded away. I stood under the porch light until sweat cooled on my skin and the shaking in my legs eased into something like anger. When I finally went home, every lock slid into place with a sound I felt in my teeth. I checked my windows. I set my phone on charge. I told myself I would skip the next run. I told myself 10 sensible things and did not believe any of them. When I lay awake listening to the quiet reorganize itself around me, I realized with sudden clarity that he had not chased me. He had stayed exactly where he wanted to be, and the worst part was the certainty that he knew my route as well as I did. I did not run the next night. That was my first act of defiance, small and shaking, and it felt like trying to hold back weather with my palms. I stayed home, cooked food I barely tasted, and reviewed inspection photos on my tablet until numbers blurred. Every few minutes my eyes slid to the front window, half expecting to see a narrow figure waiting in the shadow of the maple across the street. Nothing moved. The block stayed still, as orderly as it always pretended to be. When sleep finally took me, it came in sharp fragments. Dreams where my legs pumped and never covered ground. Dreams where I stood under a streetlight and someone measured the distance to me in calm, patient steps. By morning, I woke with my jaw tense and a headache that throbbed behind my right eye. On the drive to work, I kept checking my mirrors, not because there was anything to see, because I needed to be sure that there was not. By the second night, I ran again and told myself I hated that it felt like relief. The moon was low and pale, the canal water moving in soft folds instead of black glass. I kept my pace moderate on purpose, refusing to give in to the urge to sprint. The footfalls appeared before the bridge exactly where they had before, so timed to my own steps that it was like hearing my echo arrive before I made the sound. I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, my steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, the other set. Perfect overlap. I sped up by instinct and then forced myself to back off. The space between us remained stubbornly unchanged. I still could not see him, only the suggestion of him in the long stretched shadow that lined up with mine as if stitched to it. This time I did not stop to confront the empty light. I ran the full route with my shoulders tight, waiting for my body to betray me with a stumble or a cramp. It did not. When I ducked into my driveway at the end and spun around, heart racing with the hope of ending the game on my terms, the street behind me was as blank as it had been the first night. Silence has a way of feeling like being watched when you have learned the wrong lesson from it. At work the next day, coincidence sharpened into something harder. A maintenance crew had flagged me to inspect a failed retaining wall near Riverside Park. The soil had slumped in overnight, leaving a messy bite out of the slope above one of the pedestrian paths. While I traced the failure line with my finger and explained probable erosion patterns to Rob, a county deputy stood a few steps back, talking quietly into his radio. When Rob wandered off to photograph the rebar, I drifted closer under the pretense of curiosity. "What happened?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. The deputy looked tired in a practiced way. "Search party came through here at first light," he said. "Missing runner, third one this year." The words slid into me and stayed there. Missing runner was such a thin phrase for what it suggested. When I went to find Jenna later by the trucks, she was already staring at her phone with that focused frown that meant news. "Did you hear about the jogger from Westfield?" she asked. "Vanished on her usual route 2 nights ago. No phone, no shoes. The comments are insane." I told her I had not heard. My voice came out steadier than I felt. That night, I noticed the reflection first. Not the man. Not the footfalls. A red pin of light winked once in the dark glass of a closed shop window as I passed. So brief I might have missed it if my nerves had not been coiled so tight. I slowed just enough to watch my own reflection stretch and then slip aside as I moved past the storefront. The red light was gone. The footfalls stayed. I wanted to whirl and run back and tear through the darkness, hunting for the source of that single glimmer. But the larger part of me understood what panic cost. So I kept my pace even and let my eyes work without snapping at every shadow. The canal smelled faintly of wet stone. A loose board rattled somewhere on the service dock. My breath found its rhythm again, and with it came the sickening clarity that this was not accidental proximity. Someone was not just following my route, someone was watching it. On the 4th night, I broke my rule. I turned left at the warehouse instead of right and took a route that ran past an all-night gym and a row of dim clinics that closed at dusk. I aimed for light and other bodies like a swimmer heading for shore. The footfalls did not hesitate. They curved with me, patient and exact. I cut across a parking lot and hopped a low chain barrier I knew was loose on one side. I ran between 2 idling delivery vans and burst out onto a parallel street that should have put at least a half block between me and anyone lazy or human enough to follow the obvious line. The steps matched me again within seconds. When I glanced back this time, I caught movement, not just a shadow. A long leg clearing the same barrier I had, smooth and unhurried. He landed with a weight that did not sound heavy enough for his height. The gym windows glowed beyond him like a promise I had misguidedly chased. I ducked through the door with a burst of borrowed courage and did not look back until the bell had finished ringing. Inside, the air smelled of cleaner and warm rubber. A woman ran on a treadmill with her hair braided tight against her skull. A trainer scrolled on his phone by the desk. I stood dripping and shaking and tried to look like I had simply hit a wall in my interval set. After a minute, I ventured to the glass and peered out. The street was empty. No tall silhouette. No red pin of light. I did not leave for nearly an hour. When I finally stepped back into night with my hoodie up and my keys threaded between my fingers in the way you learn without admitting who taught you, nothing waited for me. The space between safety and fear did not widen, it only rearranged itself. The 5th night, I did not even bother lying to myself about fear. My mother called just before sunset to tell me about a leaky faucet and a neighbor dispute, like the world had not tilted on its axis without consulting her. I let her talk. I made the right sympathetic noises. I did not tell her that the idea of routine had begun to feel like a dare. Running had been my way to outrun a house that never stayed quiet long when my father was alive, a way to move until words lost their edges. I had built my life around proving that I could choose the pattern and survive it. Now, the pattern seemed to belong to someone else. When the footfalls returned that night, they were closer than they had ever been. Close enough that I could hear a faint hitch that was not part of my own breathing. The canal lights came and went, and the gap between my shadow and his narrowed until they nearly touched. I told myself not to look. I failed. He was there, no more than 20 yards back, face pale in the sliding wash of light, eyes lost in shade. He did not raise a hand. He did not hurry. He simply kept pace, as if this was a shared appointment he never intended to miss. By the time I reached the bridge, I was running on something like anger again, the kind that steadies instead of shakes. I slowed to a jog and then to a walk. The footfalls slowed with me. I stopped. He stopped. We stood in the center of the path, two fixed points on a line drawn long before either of us had named it. The distance between us was less than it had ever been, less than half a block. I could make out the plain shape of his jacket and the way his head tipped slightly to one side, as if he were considering an object on a shelf. I did not speak. I waited to see what silence demanded of him. After a moment that stretched wide enough to hold every unsolved disappearance I had ever heard of, he took a single step forward. Only one. Then he stopped again, careful as a surveyor setting a marker. I turned and ran the last stretch home with my lungs on fire and my hands numb, knowing with terrible certainty that the game had changed. He no longer needed to stay where he wanted to be. He wanted to be closer. By the sixth night, I understood that hiding inside my house was a kind of rehearsal for surrender. I tried it anyway. I drew the curtains tight and let every light inside blaze like a challenge. I called Jenna and told her I needed company without saying why. She brought takeout and 2 bottles of cheap wine and filled my kitchen with noise on instinct, talking about a pothole that had swallowed an entire front tire and a training course she wanted to take in the fall. "You look like you are bracing for impact," she said after a while, studying me over the rim of her glass. I almost told her everything then. The footsteps, the shadow, the way the space between us kept shrinking as if measured by someone else's ruler. Instead, I said, "There is a runner missing from Riverside. 3rd one this year." Her face changed. "Yeah," she said. "I know. They keep it quiet when they can. My cousin works intake at the hospital. She hears things before the press does." The word intake seemed to echo between us. I imagined a door that swallowed people and did not spit them back out. When Jenna left, hugging me too tightly, the house fell silent with new weight. At midnight, I took out the trash just to prove that the quiet did not own me. The street was empty. The maple did not hide anyone. Still, my skin did not believe my eyes. The next morning, I broke my own rule about not crossing lines between work and the rest of my life. I asked Rob for access to the county reports on path failures and maintenance incidents along running routes. He raised an eyebrow. "You starting a side project?" he asked. I told him I was looking for patterns. That part was true. He granted the access with a shrug and went back to his tablet. For 3 hours, I sat at my desk, scrolling through reports, slips, falls, lighting outages, security camera malfunctions. I pulled everything that even hinted at an overlap with the disappearances Jenna had mentioned. A makeshift map grew on my screen in colored pins. It did not take long to see the shape hidden inside it. 3 vanishing points arranged along a loose arc that traced the same canal and bridge I ran 6 nights a week. My throat tightened, as if my body had found a word my mind was still avoiding. I printed the map and folded it into my bag. On my lunch break, I drove to Riverside and walked the path in daylight like the world had not taught me better. The retaining wall we had flagged was cordoned off with tape now. Everything looked ordinary in the disarming way of daylight. I paced the distance from the nearest parking lot to the spot where the path dipped toward the water. I counted steps. I sat on a bench and watched people pass. A man with a golden retriever, a teenage girl on a skateboard, a pair of retirees with matching caps. I studied the sight lines and the blind curves and thought about patience as a resource, something that could be spent deliberately over time until it bought access. My phone buzzed with a message from Jenna, asking if I wanted to grab dinner. I did not respond right away. I was still thinking about how the canal curved just enough at a certain point to hide what waited beyond it. That night, I left my phone on the kitchen counter and ran with only a slim emergency card tucked into my bra. Money, ID, a note I had written to myself with shaking hands that said, "If you stop here, it is because you chose it." The footsteps met me at the bridge again. They were so close now that I could hear the faint scrape of fabric. I did not change my pace. I did not look back. I let the canal path draw us both forward on its unspooling line. At the midpoint where the lights dimmed and the water slid under a lip of shadow, I did the one thing I had not tried yet. I spoke. "I know about Riverside," I said, my voice steadier than my pulse. "And Westfield and Brook Lane." The footsteps did not falter. There was no answer. "You have a routine," I went on. "So do I." The space between us held. The absence of response felt deliberate, a refusal to exchange anything that could be held against him. When I reached the residential blocks, I did not turn into my driveway. I kept going, 3 streets past my house, then cut right into a cul-de-sac that led nowhere. The houses there were dark. The street light at the center flickered as if undecided about existence. I stopped beneath it and turned. He stood not 10 yards away now, too close for shadows to do him any favors. He was older than I had expected. Long face, pale eyes that did not blink when caught in the light. His clothes were unremarkable in the way that helps things disappear. "Why me?" I asked before I could stop myself. The question was small, almost foolish, but it had been waiting for a mouth. He tilted his head again, the faintest echo of the movement he had made on the bridge, and for a moment I thought he might speak. Instead, he took one more step forward. That was all the answer there would be. I ran before my body could finish deciding what terror meant in that space. I did not go home. I ran to the gym again and stayed inside until someone noticed my wild eyes and asked if I needed help. I said I was waiting for a ride and sat with my back against the wall, counting my breaths until numbers reclaimed their meaning. When I finally drove away, I took the long loop through lit streets and 24-hour storefronts. My house was still standing when I reached it. All the locks were untouched. Nothing had moved. Inside, I paced until dawn and then showered as if water could rinse off a question that had not yet found its shape. At 7, I called the county records office and asked for archived police reports tied to the disappearances. A clerk put me on hold and came back with a polite refusal. At 9, I drove there in person with my badge and the map folded into my bag. The lobby was a gray room with too many angles. A sergeant with tired eyes met me at the desk. I showed him the pins. I told him where those paths overlapped. I told him about the footsteps without using the word that would have earned a look I did not want. Slow understanding moved across his face. "We have something you should see," he said after a long moment, and led me through a door I had never noticed. In a narrow room that smelled of dust and humming electronics, he set a compact player on a metal table and slid a small black rectangle toward me. "This was recovered from a drainage culvert near one of the early sites," he said. "No prints we could lift, no name attached." I stared at the device until the room seemed to tilt. "You can watch," he added quietly. I pressed play with fingers that did not want to obey. The screen bloomed into shaky motion, pavement, a runner's back, the rhythmic rise and fall of shoulders that I recognized too well. The recording followed at a fixed distance that did not change no matter how the figure on the screen sped up or slowed. Minutes passed in silence. Then the runner on the screen veered left without warning. The camera followed. "He does this for weeks," the sergeant said behind me. "Different victims, different routes, always the same distance, always the same patience." My stomach tightened as the video played on. The runner slowed, stopped, turned with a startled motion. The image lurched forward in a rush that broke the pattern at last. The screen went black. I did not need to see more to understand what that break meant. When I turned away, the room felt suddenly too small to contain what I had learned. The footsteps I had feared were not a warning. They were a refinement. After the video, the world rearranged itself into angles of threat and possibility. I drove back to my office in a haze and sat at my desk without opening the tablet, watching dust spiral in a beam of late afternoon light. The sergeant had not tried to stop me from leaving. He had only said, "Do not change your routine," in a voice that assumed routines were fixed objects instead of agreements we make with ourselves. I understood his logic. The man wanted breaks. He wanted deviations. But the idea of continuing to serve myself up as a predictable line on a map felt less like strategy and more like obedience. I texted Jenna a single word, "busy," and ignored the worry that flared back almost immediately. Then I pulled the folded printout from my bag and spread it on the desk. The arc of disappearances glowed in fluorescent ink. I added a fourth pin where my driveway sat and did not tell myself any lies about coincidence. That evening, I did not run. I walked instead, slow and deliberate, with my hood down and my shoulders squared like armor. The streetlights threw clean circles onto the pavement. I kept to the middle of them as if shadow were water I could drown in. There were no footfalls behind me, no red pin in glass, nothing but the ordinary sound of a neighborhood finishing its day. When I reached the end of the block, I turned back anyway, forcing myself to meet my own nerves on neutral ground. Still nothing. It was tempting to believe that skipping the run had changed the equation. It would have been a relief to think he had been bound by the same habits that governed me, but the video had taught me better. He did not need my routine to exist. He needed it to break. Across the next 3 nights, absence became a pressure of its own. I ran once, walked once, stayed home once. The footsteps did not return. Every evening, I felt my body brace anyway at the bridge, as if sound could choose to reappear just because I had prepared for it. Each night, I returned home with my nerves scraped raw by the effort of expecting. I reviewed the video in my head as if it were a blueprint. Weeks of surveillance, fixed distance, no contact until the victim changed something. The pattern was not pursuit, it was conditioning. By the 4th night, I stopped thinking about hiding and started thinking about how a predator miscalculates when it mistakes control for certainty. Jenna cornered me in the parking lot 2 mornings later with a coffee in one hand and her keys in the other. "You have been ghosting," she said without softness. "Either you are in trouble or you are being rude." I hesitated, then made a decision that felt like a step onto a narrow beam. I told her everything I could without leaning on the word that would make it sound like fiction. The footsteps, the video, the way the man had stepped closer on the bridge and then vanished entirely. She listened without interrupting, her face losing color a little at a time. When I finished, she said very quietly, "You are not wrong to be scared." Hearing it put that way did not comfort me the way I expected. "You need cops," she went on. I told her I had already spoken to one. I did not tell her what he had asked of me, because even repeating it out loud made it sound like a dare. She searched my face. "You are thinking about baiting him," she said. It was not a question. "I am thinking about ending this," I replied. She swore once under her breath and pulled me into a brief, fierce hug. "Then do not do it alone," she said into my shoulder. The plan took shape in pieces borrowed from my own skill set. I knew where temporary hazards lived. Unfinished trenches, poorly lit excavations sealed with plywood and optimism. 2 blocks east of the canal path, a construction pit gaped in the middle of a site, stalled by permit disputes. Orange fencing sagged. Reflective tape peeled away in tired curls. During the day, it looked obvious in the way daylight makes honest. At night, the shadows made it a mouth. I had written 3 warnings about that pit over the last month and watched them languish in the queue while budgets shifted. The idea of using it twisted my stomach. I had spent my career trying to keep people away from places that wanted to take them. Now I was considering leading someone into one by design. The distinction between prevention and instrument felt thin when I held it up to the light. To make a decoy path, I needed to make him believe a break had finally come for reasons that belonged to me. I spent 2 days altering my routine in small public ways. I bought new running shoes at the sporting goods store that faced the canal and left with the box visible under my arm. I liked 2 running route posts on a local forum and commented casually on a scenic loop that passed the stalled construction site. I let myself be seen changing clothes in my car at the end of my actual run so that any distant lens would record the wrong beginning and the wrong end. If he had been watching for weeks, he would know I did not drift. I needed him to believe that I finally had. Jenna objected to every piece of it and still helped me with all of it. She borrowed a sweatshirt of mine and wore it on a brief jog along the new loop one evening while I drove the old route in my car with the lights off. It felt foolish and precise at the same time, 2 ways to tell the same lie. On the night we chose, the air carried the hint of rain that never quite arrived. I parked near the idle site and stretched in the open like a performance. Jenna waited half a mile away with a charged phone and a finger hovering over emergency contacts. "If you do not text in 30 minutes, I call for help," she said over the burner she had insisted I carry. No extensions, I agreed. The canal lights blinked on in sequence as I started the new route at an easy pace, selling effort with the steady rhythm he would expect. The footfalls joined me before I reached the first curve. Closer than they had ever been. Relief and fear tangled until I had to slow just to separate them. I did not look back. The pit waited on my left, hidden by tarp and dark. The trick would be to reach it without signaling that the endpoint had shifted. We passed 2 closed storefronts and a shuttered cafe where a chalkboard still advertised soup from a happier season. The sound of his steps followed every change in mine without hesitation. My lungs burned with effort I could have sustained for miles on another night. This was different. This was the effort of deciding each breath on its own terms. I altered my pace in uneven increments, a stutter here, a push there, as if nerves were finally confusing me. The footfalls mirrored me with worshipful accuracy. When the orange fencing came into view at the edge of my peripheral sight, I cut left hard and vaulted it with a burst of speed that felt like tearing cloth. The ground changed texture under my shoes from street to loose gravel. I skidded and caught myself, throwing my weight forward with an ugly laugh that belonged to neither courage nor fear. "You finally got me to change," I called into the dark without turning. The footsteps hit the fence a second later, with the first real urgency I had ever heard from them. The pit was a raw square torn out of the earth. Walls slanted and treacherous, its bottom hidden by shadow and a thin skin of pooled rainwater. I ran diagonally along the lip for 3 steps and then pivoted, scraping my soles across the surface to scatter pebbles over the edge. The sound of them rattling down was small and fast and endless. Behind me, his steps faltered for the first time since the bridge. Not a stop, a hitch, a miscount in the rhythm that had governed everything between us. He reached the fence and went over it in a smooth arc that was almost beautiful. For a fraction of a second, we were the same height, suspended in the same stolen air. Then his foot met the rolling gravel I had loosened. His body tilted with surprise that registered more in the sudden clench of his shoulders than in any sound. He slid, caught for an instant on the edge with one hand, and then lost it. The fall was not long. It did not need to be. The angle did the work. The way his body struck the slanted wall folded him in a direction that people are not meant to bend. The sound he made then was not loud, but it was complete. I stood at the lip shaking so hard my teeth clicked, watching the dark struggle that became stillness. I did not approach. I sank to my knees where I was and waited for the moment to pass, when my muscles would obey me again. When I finally forced myself to the fence, I could see him below in the shallow water, eyes open, chest moving in quick, shallow rises that made me count despite myself. I did not feel triumph. I felt the strange, sober relief of having done exactly what I had been trying not to do for weeks. I used my burner to call Jenna. When she answered, I could not find the right words, so I said the only true thing that did not carry gore inside it. "It is over," I told her. Sirens arrived before she did, their sound splitting the quiet into urgent, clean lines. The weeks after the pit felt unreal in the way that follows any violent punctuation to a long sentence. The man did not die that night. The deputies pulled him out with careful speed and a backboard that looked too small for his long frame. The medic who checked him kept his face deliberately blank, the kind of expression that means the truth is heavy. I gave my statement twice that evening, once in a patrol car with the door open and rain ticking on the roof, and once under fluorescent lights that hum in a way you do not notice until your nerves are still vibrating. I told them about the footsteps and the matching pace. I told them about the video at the records office and the pattern I had traced. I did not tell them everything. I did not say how long I had waited at the edge of the pit, counting the rise and fall of his chest. Some truths do not help anyone carry the rest. Jenna held my hand through the second statement and stared down anyone who tried to ask me questions that were not useful. When they let us go, dawn was bruising the horizon and the world did not look clean the way stories sometimes promise after a crisis. It looked exactly the same. That steadiness felt like a rebuke. They found the tapes 3 days later. A warrant. A small apartment on the east side above a shuttered laundromat. I did not go with them, but I saw enough later to know what that space had been designed to hold. Shelving lined one wall from floor to ceiling, filled with identical black cases labeled only with dates and street names. They played some of them for me in a quiet room with two detectives and a counselor who never took notes. I watched myself from angles I had never imagined being stored, from behind a dumpster where I had once paused to retie a shoe, from across the canal where my reflection bent in the water. I saw how often he had been there when I had not known to look. I saw how the distance he kept was not a limit, but a craft. It was an hourglass he turned over and over until sand became certainty. The detective explained how he studied the moment when runners broke, an illness, a new job, a changed route. He waited for that single deviation like a door being cracked open for him. Psychological wear comes first, the detective said. Then the body gives him permission. I thought about all the times I had felt watched without proof and dismissed it because it did not match the tidy idea of threat I carried. The idea that fear had been part of a design made me angry in a way that had no heat, only weight. He lived long enough to be charged. The legal machinery moved faster than I expected, as if the case had been waiting for a final piece that could be slid into place at last. 3 disappearances became attempted murder and assault once his condition stabilized enough for interrogation. The rest was a reaching back through years of unsolved reports and mislabeled evidence. The tapes gave names back to people who had vanished into comment sections and candlelight vigils. Families called the station and learned details they had been denied in the name of procedure. The sound of that wave reached me through news alerts I did not open and through the tremor in Jenna's voice when she read headlines over breakfast. The man died in custody 9 days after the fall, his lungs giving out under the weight of what his spine could no longer hold upright. The articles called it complications. The comments called it justice. Neither word sat easily on my chest. I felt no vindication, only the end of a sound that had followed me for weeks and a sudden awareness of the space it left behind. Returning to the canal was harder than I expected. The city repaired the fence around the pit within days, all clean lines and reflective tape, the hazard now tidy and official, as if danger needed better manners to be addressed. Rob sent out a bulletin congratulating the team on the quick response to the structural failure. No one mentioned what had fallen into it. Routine asserted itself with its usual appetite, swallowing strangeness in measured bites. I went back to work and felt my body reject the old shortcuts it had relied on without asking permission. Every shadow wanted context. Every echo wanted a source. When I stood on the bridge at midday to inspect a compromised railing, the view of black water did not move like menace anymore. It moved like water. That distinction mattered more than I could have explained to anyone who had not had their sense of pursuit recalibrated. I stopped running at night, not as an act of surrender, but as an acknowledgement that certain rituals belong to a person only until they belong to a stranger too. The canal path became a place I visited in daylight only, where sweat could mean effort without the added tax of vigilance. Jenna watched me with a careful affection that was new between us. She did not pretend everything had folded back into its old shape. She let the change exist as its own thing. On my first night back at her place for dinner, she slid a beer across the table and said, "You do not have to be brave here." The simple permission nearly undid me. We talked about small things for a while, a training course she had applied for, a pothole repaired, a stray cat that had adopted the crew at the yard. Then she said, "They caught his name today." I did not ask it. Names had power in ways that outlast facts. He had a job, she added. He delivered rental equipment. He learned routes for a living. The idea landed with a dull inevitability. Of course he had. Of course his patience had come with a uniform and a schedule and a reason to move without raising alarms. "They will make a show of him," she said. I thought of the shelves of tapes and the careful handwriting on the spines. He had already made a show of all of us. The difference now was that the audience had changed. The families reached out, some through official channels and some through paths that slipped through anyway. I answered a letter from a sister whose brother had disappeared at Riverside and learned a piece of what it means to be thanked for surviving when others did not. The words were careful and raw. She wanted to know what I had seen. I told her only what would not live longer than the telling. I did not give her images. I gave her the truth that he had not chased in the way movies taught us to fear, that he had waited instead. He wanted control long before he wanted bodies, I wrote. She replied weeks later with a single line. Now we see what he could do. It was not closure, it was location. The counselor from the station suggested I think about the difference between an ending and a stopping point. I considered that on a late afternoon when the light lay flat and gold across the path and the canal held it without distortion. I was walking with no schedule, my hands empty of tools and keys and improvisations. The city sounded like itself again, not safe, not cruel, just itself in the steady foraging way it has always had. I thought about my job as prediction, about how often we imagine that foreseeing is the same as preventing. The pit had been marked and delayed and survived long enough to be used as an answer, which says as much about the system as it does about me. I did not feel like a hero. I felt like an arc that had bent as far as it could without breaking. The sound of matched footsteps had trained me to hear an absence I had not practiced noticing before. Silence now did not mean safety. It meant the work of learning what moved without sound. Sometimes, in the early hours just before dawn, I dream of counting again. 1, 2, 3, 4. The numbers arrive in order. The echo does not. I wake with my heart steady and my lungs full, the absence of a second rhythm as present as a held breath. In those moments, I understand the strange kindness of the way this ended, not with a chase that could be retold as conquest, but with a miscalculation that finally broke the lockstep he demanded of the world. I did not outrun him. I let him follow until the ground refused to cooperate. There is humility in that truth that I am still learning how to carry. The canal has returned to being a line on my map rather than a sentence written around my ankles. I have returned to being a woman who chooses her movements again, small, deliberate choice by choice. The space where his footsteps once lived has not filled with noise. It has filled with the weight of watching and the promise that I do not have to agree to be measured in anyone else's timing ever again. I went back to the bridge for the first sunrise I allowed myself to watch from that height since the fall. The city always pretends morning is a clean negotiation, but from the bridge you can see how the night only loosens its grip in stages. Sodium lights click off in tired surrender. Windows blink awake one by one. The canal takes on color slowly, like someone stirring pigment into water with infinite patience. I leaned my forearms against the railing we had repaired and felt the vibration of traffic beginning beneath me. The spot where I had stopped and turned to face him looked almost ceremonial now. Nothing marked it except the way my feet knew where to stand without looking. I stayed until the sun lifted high enough to erase every shadow from the path below, not because erasure is possible, but because it felt important to watch the light do the honest work it still knows how to do. My phone buzzed with a message from Jenna asking if I was awake. At the bridge, I typed back. The reply came fast. Good. Stay as long as you need. It was the kind of permission that assumes return without demanding proof of it. The trial took months and blurred into a procession of rooms that all smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. I testified once, answering questions that tried to turn endurance into spectacle and timing into motive. The defense wanted to talk about the pit as if gravity were my accomplice instead of a fact of the world. The prosecutor wanted me to describe the sound of his fall. I refused that with the calm I had practiced in smaller, harder ways. The important part, I said, is that he had been filming people for weeks before they broke. The fall only stopped him from continuing. The judge did not smile. He did not need to. The sentence recognized the calculus without dressing it in drama. When it was over, the hallway filled with a murmur that felt like a crowd exhaling into relief that did not belong to them personally, but still claimed them as witnesses. A woman with silver threaded through her hair took my hand without asking and whispered the name of the sister whose letter I had answered. We did not exchange stories. We exchanged the brief, steady look of people who agree to leave the rest unsaid. Work changed in ways both obvious and subtle. The city fast-tracked hazard repairs along the canal. New lighting rose with surgical speed. The pit that had been my answer became a finished foundation inside of 6 weeks, its square mouth closed with fresh concrete that steamed pale in cold mornings. I supervised the pour, not out of obligation, but out of a need to see the blank filled with something that would not tilt under a man. Rob never asked why I volunteered for that oversight when there were dozens of other tasks clamoring for attention. He seemed to understand that some closures ask for hands as well as reports. Jenna transferred to a different crew closer to home and left me a note in the bottom drawer of my desk so I would find it one tired afternoon when I was least on guard. Different routes are allowed, it said in her careful block letters. Underneath, she had drawn a crooked bridge and a stick figure with its arms raised as if in joy or surrender. I kept the note. I did not need it in a frame to know where it belonged. I began to run again with the season, but not the way I once had. Morning miles replaced midnight sprints. The routes were broader, less secretive. I joined a weekend group that met near the river and tolerated my quiet with the same easy respect they offered breathers and water breaks. No one tried to know me too quickly. One woman with a laugh that ricocheted off brick told me her knee story on the first run and never circled back to it for sympathy. A man with a limp paced me through my worst mile and talked about bread recipes as if carbohydrates were the only faith that mattered. The rhythm of shared effort stitched something back together that had been torn in ways I had not acknowledged while it tore. Sometimes on a shaded stretch, I would feel the echo of a second pace without sound or sight, and it would make my stride falter. Each time I learned to let the sensation arrive and then pass without argument. Fear also has a routine. It needs to be answered, not obeyed. My mother visited in late fall and stood in my kitchen, peering out at the maple that had once been my imagined lookout. She traced a finger along the counter where my keys lay within reach and said, "You moved the furniture." It was not an accusation. It was the observation of a woman who measures love in careful catalogs. "I needed a wider path," I said. She nodded, as if that settled a long-standing debate between us. Over dinner, she told me about the faucet that no longer leaked and the neighbor who no longer complained. I waited for the question she would pretend was not waiting. It came at last, framed as concern for my hours and my sleep. I told her the truth without the sharp edges. "Someone followed me for a while," I said. It ended. Her hand stilled on her glass. "Are you safe?" she asked, with the fierce simplicity that outlives language. I thought about the words as tools instead of talismans and answered with the only one I trusted. "Safer," I said. She accepted it the way we accept weather reports when umbrellas are already in hand. The records office archived the tapes under a new classification designed to limit access without turning history into a locked room. Once a year, I receive a formal letter informing me that the evidence remains intact and that I am not required to appear for appeals that never quite die. I file the letters without ceremony and do not revisit the footage. Memory does not need rehearsal to maintain its hold. I met with the counselor one last time at the edge of winter when the sky tightens early and the afternoons shorten like apologies. She asked me what I had learned to hear now that the matched footsteps were gone. The question surprised me with its generosity. "My own timing," I said after a long pause, "and the difference between being watched and being witnessed." She smiled at that in a way that suggested I had named something she sees people reach for in fumbling phrases. When we parted, she shook my hand like a colleague rather than a patient. It felt like graduation from a course I had not chosen. On the anniversary of the fall, I returned to the site with Jenna and a thermos of coffee that steamed into the cold morning. The building that stood where the pit had been was still unfinished, skeletal with promise. We leaned against the temporary fence and watched workers climb steel the way ants climb sugar. "Do you regret it?" she asked, not for the story, but for the day-to-day. The question was clean. It deserved a clean answer. I searched my own horizon for the truth that would not dissolve under it. "I regret that it had to be learned that way," I said. "I do not regret that it was learned." She nodded and bumped her shoulder against mine. "That is the best version," she said. We drank in silence then, the kind that holds conversation inside it without pressing for release. When we left, neither of us looked back. The site no longer asked for witnesses. What remains with me is not his face or the shelves or the fall. What remains is the sound of my own feet in steady, unopposed time, and the knowledge that routine can be a refuge without becoming a leash. Some nights, I lie awake and recite the route as it used to be, not as a dare, but as a map of where I once proved something about endurance that still belongs to me. I am not defined by the distance he kept, nor by the moment it collapsed. I am defined by the choices that followed in daylight and in crowds and in the quiet of kitchens where keys rest within reach. When I cross the bridge now, it is with a practiced glance at the rail and the water and the sky. Nothing follows me but the echo that every runner carries. That echo does not close the gap, it keeps it, and in that kept space, I have learned how to move again without being measured by anyone else. This is what happened to me one summer night. I'm not going to give the exact location for privacy reasons, but I can say it's in a very religious state. I usually like to go on late night drives. This was a few years ago around early June. I was on one of these drives in my Jeep Grand Cherokee. This was a well-maintained dirt road that leads to a place called Sandy Beach by the lake, a frequent hangout and hunting spot. I turned off the pavement expecting to see maybe a deer or some birds, so I was taking it fairly slow. Windows down and music up, just enjoying the warm night air. The moon was about half crescent, and the stars were bright, for there was no buildings within 3 miles of this road. Once I came up the parking lot, I was surprised to find that the road no longer went to the edge of the lake. Usually you can drive right up to the water and a ways down the beach. Either way, I stayed in the Jeep and just turned around. I wasn't far from the parking lot when I rounded a corner and saw something in the road. To avoid hitting it, I slammed on my brakes. Dust covered the area as I sat idling. As the dust cleared, I saw a grotesque sight. Something that resembled a mangy black dog was in the middle of the road. It was staring right at me. Its eyes were a glowing yellow color. I sat half frozen in fear and suricity as to what the hell I was looking at. Now I've heard stories about skinwalkers and dogmen, but this didn't look like either. It was hunched over and extremely skinny, with a long bony tail. Its skin was oily black, with no hair I could see. Its mouth was dripping with this black ooze. Its claws looked mangled. I don't know how long I was staring at this thing. All I know was that I couldn't move. As if its stare paralyzed me, everything else was quiet, and I could only hear the blood rushing in my ears. At some point, it turned towards me, and in one leap, it jumped on the hood of the Jeep and stared through the windshield. I was completely paralyzed with fear at this point. It slowly crawled up the windshield to the open sunroof, its yellow eyes peering into my soul as it opened its mouth. Its breath smelled rotten, its mangled teeth were black and oozing this oily substance. I could only stare in horror as it reached one of its mangled arms down through the roof. It got incredibly close to me. Something then snapped me out of my trance, and I remember I had a gas pedal, so I just floored it. The rear tires spun in the dirt, trying desperately to grab traction. I just turned my head towards the road as the car lurched forward hard. The thing on the roof tumbled along as I booked it out of there. I didn't look in the rear view mirror the whole way to the pavement in partial fear that it was giving chase. As soon as I hit the comfort of the pavement again, the tires squealed and began smoking as I floored it the several miles back home. I was so terrified that I hardly slept that night. The next morning, I went outside to check on the Jeep, and that black ooze was still on the hood and windshield, confirming that it wasn't just some nightmare. It was thick and smelly. It had the consistency of oil with like bits of dirt or something in it. The smell was putrid and made me gag. I went inside and washed my hands, then immediately took the Jeep to a car wash. To this day, I can still smell that stench. If anyone has an idea to what it was, please let me know. I still don't know what I saw, and it gives me chills still to talk about it. Every Wednesday, my parents will leave the house to go on a date, and I'll be home alone during that time. I'm an only child, so they only need to worry about me and not another kid. Sometimes it gets lonely, but hey, it makes things peaceful when it needs to be. When I was younger, they'd get a babysitter, but I'm old enough now to where they can trust that I won't run off or burn the house down or anything like that, and this has been normal and fine until recently. See, recently there's been something, I guess strange would be the most applicable word. Something strange has been happening. So every Wednesday, they'll leave around 5 p.m., give or take a few minutes. They're pretty punctual about it, which I appreciate. So every evening around 5, they'll say their goodbyes to me and leave. However, these last few weeks, there's been a knocking at the door. The first time it happened, it was exactly 6:45. I assumed that maybe it was a neighbor coming for something, or my parents just got home early, or even a delivery of sorts. However, when I opened the door, no one was there. A little odd, but probably just some neighborhood kids trying to confuse me. 2 weeks later, it happened again. At exactly 6:45, there was a firm 3 knocks on the front door, but there was no one there when I checked. Again, kind of weird, but whatever. Since that second time, it's been happening every single week. Every Wednesday at 6:45 on the dot, I'll hear 3 firm knocks on the front door, but no one is there. I haven't brought it up to my parents because, well, it's probably not a big deal. Or, well, it could be. See, the reason I'm coming here to post about this isn't because, oh, I'm freaked out over this thing that happens every week, but is ultimately harmless. No, this last time was a little bit different, and I'm starting to get properly spooked. So, last week, Wednesday, August 17th, my parents are out on a date, as they do. I'm in the living room watching Bones. 6:45 is growing closer, so I have the volume a little low. My attention split between listening for the knocking and what's happening in the episode. 6:45 rolls around and nothing. No knocking, no noise, just the sound of my own heartbeat and the show on the TV. I waited for about 5 more minutes, thinking that maybe whoever kept bugging me was just a bit late. Nothing. This has been happening for several months, and now it just stops. Either the kid messing with me or whatever is going on got bored, or I've just been hearing things this whole time. It irked me out so bad that I just had to check. I opened the front door and looked around. The sky was a little gray as the sun was approaching the end of its day cycle, but the whole area around was still lit. No one was nearby. However, upon looking down at the mat, I saw a small envelope. No return address, just Elijah, which is my name. This was hand-delivered and definitely wasn't there when my parents left, which didn't exactly fill me with reassurance. The handwriting was so neat, at first I thought it was typed, but upon further inspection, I can tell it was definitely written on with a Sharpie or something. I knew my parents would be returning in only a little over an hour, so I quickly went upstairs and put the envelope under my pillow so I could open it later that night when I wasn't alone in the house. That's a bit random, but I just felt unsafe, you know? I headed back downstairs, made sure the front door was locked, and went back to watch Bones and get my mind off of it. Thankfully, for my own peace of mind, nothing else happened that night. My parents came back at around 8, and I was able to go back upstairs without feeling too uneasy. I wish I could tell you I opened the letter right then, that I spent the whole night reading over whatever it said and coming to some conclusion, but the truth? I was too afraid. I only opened it yesterday. For the visually impaired or anyone who can't read that for whatever reason, it's handwritten on lined paper that's ripped around the edges. Here is what it says. Elijah, my middle, plus last names. You have been so lonely recently, so very lonely. Do you enjoy my visits? If you find this letter before your parents do, I'll assume the answer is yes. You should let me in sometime. I'd love to visit. I'm officially freaked out now. Who is this person? How do they know my full name? Why is their handwriting so font-like? What is their fixation with me? Why do they always show up at the same time but never stick around, especially if they want to visit like they claim? I'm terrified. I haven't told my parents about this because I'm not sure if they'd take it seriously or not. After all, this all could just be an elaborate prank. Besides, it's not like this person's tried to properly break in or anything. My parents are going to be going on a date again in only a few days, and I'm terrified of what comes next. This is the first time the visitor has tried to make contact with me. Is it going to be different next time? Do any of you have any advice or thoughts on what this could be? Am I in danger? Please, I'll update again if anything notable happens. Another letter? A visit? Anything else that's worth noting? Hopefully, nothing will. But, well, I can only imagine it gets worse from here, right? Hello. I spend around 2 to 3 hours walking alone during the AM hours every night and have done so for years, probably 1,000 plus hours total. My reason for these walks no longer exists, thus I am stopping, and I have decided to write some of my experiences into a thread, with more later if anyone cares. I will start with my most recent one, which happened a few days ago. I was walking down a path to the entrance to the woods. As I was about to enter, I could see a flashlight walking down a path in the woods coming towards me, appearing to be scouting the area for something. I decided to wait near the entrance until they passed, which is still a few hundred yards from civilization, or any light at all. As they got closer, I could make out a male voice talking to someone over my very loud music. I assumed he was on the phone, nothing too odd. However, as I expected him to walk past me, he did not. He stood around 4F'd to the side of me. It was really dark, so he was just a silhouette, but I could see he had a massive Pfaff German Shepherd on a leash. He's still noticeably talking, but it didn't seem like he was trying to get my attention. At this point, I turn away and start walking towards the woods, when I can clearly hear him shouting something. That is when I pull one earphone out of my ear and hear something to the effect of, "It's the police. Take your earphones out and stop walking away." Realizing that he was in fact shouting at me the entire time, I turn around and say, "I'm sorry, I didn't know," and all that jazz. He asks for my name, what I'm doing there, and how long I had been there. I tell him. Then he says, "Well, I'm looking for someone, and clearly you're not them. Have you seen a girl around here?" To which I reply that no, I hadn't, and then he walks off back into the woods. That is the end of that story. I walked away and went home. Not the creepiest, I know, but I am left with questions. Why was he looking for a girl in the dark, alone at that time? And also, if he were looking for an armed criminal, appearing to ignore him and walking away could have ended very badly for me. I'm thankful he didn't lose his cool. That is, if he was even a cop. He did say he was, but I never saw his uniform as it was so dark. I have not yet seen anything on the news. I just hope the girl is okay, whatever happened. My other story is a lot scarier, yet even less conclusive. This one starts in a local park around a year ago. For context, this park, although in a nice suburban area, is supposedly notorious for being rough. However, in my countless hours walking there, this is the only vaguely scary experience I have had. I have never felt anything but comfortable otherwise. I was standing by an entrance to the park, maybe 20ft inside of it, at 2 a.m. in the morning. It was pitch black. I couldn't see a few feet in the front of me. The only light is the faint twinkle of streetlights beyond the far side of the park. As I'm standing there, earphones in with music as always, I could have sworn I saw some movement in the distance. I squint my eyes and focus on a spot on the far side, trying to make out what I noticed for maybe 10 seconds. At this point, I realize I'm not looking into the distance. I'm looking directly at someone a mere 10 or so feet in front of me. I shit you not. That feeling of realization is the single most powerful thing I have ever felt in my life. Felt like I was in a horror movie. Heart racing, I turn around and book it to the entrance behind me and start walking down the street towards my home. I'm fairly shaken up, but you know, there's nothing to indicate the guy had any sinister intentions or even knew I was there. Could have been doing same thing as me. I'm now under the streetlights walking past some well-off houses, which felt like safety to me. However, I then turned around and saw a hooded man, a stereotypical road man, as we would call them, emerge from the same entrance as me and turn my direction. He was around the same distance I would have expected had me started leaving the same time as me. Around 10-15 behind me. Again, nothing sinister probably, I thought, but just to be careful, I picked up the pace a bit. This street is around 200 before it merges with a main road. After around halfway, I turned around and see this guy is directly behind me, 10 as he was earlier. I think to myself, well, that's weird. I'm walking pretty fast, and this guy has kept up. So now I start to walk as fast as I possibly can without breaking out into a run. I specifically remember going as fast as a walk would allow me to. I maintain this for another 100 odd FT until I get to the main road. Then I turn around, and this guy is literally 5 feet behind me. He is closer than he was before I sped up rapidly. Borderline pants-shitting moment. I full-on ran all the way home, barefoot in sliders BTW, without looking behind me until I got to my front door, and that was that. Never saw him again. Could be a coincidence? Sure, maybe I happened upon a 2 a.m. power walker, but also maybe I almost got robbed. I don't know. If I had, it would be in a different subreddit, LOL. Thanks for reading if you did. I have more stories too, but I've been writing these for an hour or two and my eyes hurt. For the amount of time I have spent out in the dark, most of which is in the woods. I have surprisingly few stories. Got a few potentially paranormal ones too, but they aren't allowed here. Consider myself kinda lucky, TBH. Think I was tempting fate for quite some time.
Thanks for watching, everyone. If you'd like to support us, do hit that subscribe button and like this video. This really helps with our channel growth. So, see you tomorrow at the same time.